Hi, this is Tony Camille, and you are listening to TV Confidential.
Ed Robertson, along with guest Steve Binder. He is the co-author, along with Mary Beth Leidman, of Fade Up 26, The Movers and Shakers of Variety Television, an oral history of variety television as told by the voices of the men and women who were and are responsible for bringing these shows and so many of these stars into our home for more than 6 decades. Among the luminaries that Steve and Mary Beth interviewed for Fade Up 26 include Lorne Michaels, Marty Pacetta, George Schlatter, Nigel Lithgow, and Louis Horvitz. Fade Up 26, The Movers and Shakers of Variety Television, is available on Amazon.com and wherever books are sold online. We mentioned earlier in our program that Gary Smith passed away this past Saturday, July 19th, at the age of 90. Gary Smith not only worked with Steve Binder on Hullabaloo, but he and his longtime production partner, Dwight Hemion, were two of the people who really redefined the meaning of what we now know today as the television special. With that in mind, as we pick up our conversation with Steve Binder from August 2016, we asked Steve. Dwight Hemion is a name that came up in a lot of the answers to the questions that you and Mary Beth posed in Fade Up 26. For the benefit of our listeners who may not recognize his name, tell us a little bit about Dwight Hemion and why he was such an influence to you and so many of your contemporaries in variety television.
Well, Dwight was, eventually we became very close friends. I actually met Dwight when I was directing a rock and roll show for NBC called Hullabaloo in 1965. And the producer of Hullabaloo was Gary Smith, who eventually went into a partnership with Dwight. Dwight and my paths kind of crossed. Dwight was the original director of the Steve Allen Show when Steve was doing his late-night show out of New York. When Steve moved to the West Coast, that's when I became involved and became the director and eventually the producer-director for Steve. But Dwight deserves, I think he's the most rewarded Emmy winner in Emmy history as a variety director. And one of the reasons is, and they'll always be remembered as some of the greatest specials ever done in television, were the early on Barbra Streisand specials. And while I was doing Hullabaloo, that's when Dwight was going freelance and doing these 1-hour specials, which I eventually ended up doing as well later on. But Dwight did those classic Barbra Streisand specials. He did I believe he did a lot of the Kennedy Center honors when they first started. Whatever Dwight touched, Brezhnev on Broadway, Liza Minnelli, etc., I mean, you knew it had a stamp of quality and a stamp of, it was special. And his specialty was pictures. Mm-hmm. Dwight would literally be so respected because he somehow said, the hell with the budgets, the hell with the executives putting pressure on me. I'm just going to sit here and get the pictures I want and then say move on when I'm happy. So his specials were basically pretty expensive, I assume, from a network standpoint, but they were all classically beautiful and nobody stopped him, which is the important part. He did get to do what he wanted to do. Dwight was kind of the person who, all of us who kind of entered the business after he was established, really sought out to say, that's who, if you ask me who I want to be when I grow up, that's the guy I want to be. He's the guy who takes all these beautiful pictures, the stars who work with him love him, and so forth and so on. And I think that's why in our book it is almost like an homage to Dwight by many of his contemporaries and peers.
I'm not exaggerating, folks. You flip through Fade Up 26, Steve and Mary Beth's new book. Pretty much every page or every other page, Dwight Hemion's name comes up. That gives you an idea of how respective and what an influence, he was and continues to be to the genre of variety television. You mentioned that the pictures that Dwight created, whether he was doing the Sinatra special or Barbra Streisand or the Kennedy Center honors, a metaphor that came up on more than one occasion throughout the book was Dwight painted television. I mean, I just love that image, and it just goes to show that even though you're working in a medium that's considered commercial, you can still be artistic and you can still achieve excellence in a lot of ways, even if you're working within a set budget.
That's the reason I think that I chose, early on when I was working with Steve Allen, and over a couple of years, you meet everybody in the business, in front of the camera, behind the scenes, etc. No different than watching the late night shows today. Their obligation night after night is to fill that screen with stars. So it was a case of when I did Steve Allen, and then I did a motion picture called The Tammy Show with the Rolling Stones, and James Brown and the Flames, and the Beach Boys, and I think 9 out of the 11 artists that were in The Tammy Show are today, by total fluke. Nobody knew in 1963 or 4 when I did it that 9 of the 11 acts would be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But they are, and the film is now in the Library of Congress, and it's considered one of the great rock and roll concert films ever photographed. But it was a case of where I wanted and approached television as an artistic medium, saying in doing specials that were custom made, you can really spend the time really shooting for quality. And it's not to say that every show that I did was well received or had any active, but I certainly put 100% of everything I could into whatever project I did. I even, in the early days, even did a couple of Gilligan Islands. They had a cinematographer named Dick Rawlings who was the cinematographer on Dynasty, I think, for the entire run. And I wanted to learn 35 millimeter film and one camera technique and so forth, which I used all through my career. So I think you learn from everything, whether it was Gilligan's or it was Pee-wee's Playhouse, where I was executive producer for a few years. But you learn every time you go out. I never, ever in my life to this day said, okay, I've made it. I've now achieved what I want to achieve. The only difference between Dwight and myself that I could seriously point out that made us different is that I believe the picture was important up to a point, but the action was even more important. So I didn't want to lose it. Even if I had to shoot off the stage into the wings, if something was happening back there, I wanted to capture it, I think I learned that from Steve more than anybody.
We're talking to Steve Bender, Emmy Award-winning producer and director of such iconic variety specials as Lucy in London, The Tammy Show, and the 1968 Elvis Presley Comeback Special. Steve is also the co-author, along with Mary Beth Leidman, of Fade Up 26, The Movers and Shakers of Variety Television, an oral history of variety television as told by 26 award-winning variety show producers and directors. Fade Up 26, The Movers and Shakers of Variety Television, is available now in hardcover through Kendall Hunt Publishing.
I just wanted to comment that obviously we've been talking about a lot of successful shows. I've also had my hand in a lot of very unsuccessful shows, but with that said, I was very proud to be part of it and do it. One was the Star Wars Holiday Special, which was on CBS, aimed at Lucas trying to sell a lot of toys from Star Wars after he completed the very successful first Star Wars movie. And though there's a big controversy in how critically negatively it was reviewed and so forth, it was a great experience for me. I came in after they had started production and were ready to shut down because the show was in terrible jeopardy of completely shutting down and not airing. And I got to work with the entire Star Wars cast, a lot of the behind-the-scenes technical people, which was a great experience. And the truth of the matter is that they should have prepared the audience to say, hey, this is not a Star Wars movie. This is a show designed for kids, so they'll go out and buy toys. But the audience never knew that, and they were expecting this huge multi-million-dollar production, which never materialized. It was basically Star Wars and the Chewbacca family and a variety show with some variety stars thrown in to boot. I also was executive producer on the infamous late night show with Chevy Chase, and that was absolutely, I would love to talk about that because it, from a standpoint of the general public, it was a total disaster, and the critics, to me, it was, a man very honorable man struggling for his life and should have never been thrown into the den of wolves where they said, hey, Chevy's so popular he's going to be burying Jay Leno and David Letterman, even though they were with the two biggest networks and were on the air for years and super successful. I said from day one, they should just sneak Chevy on the air, let him prove himself after the first year, and then they can start advertising and publicizing him. But when the show got canceled and all the negative stuff came out, I was very proud of Chevy because he never pointed the finger at anybody else other than himself. And Chevy had never, it was the wrong format for him. He should have done a show like Bill Maher is doing today with politicians and what have you. He could care less about interviewing B actors and so forth. And he had never improvised in his life. I mean, people don't realize that even Saturday Night Live is a tightly controlled script show. I mean, Lorne Michaels does not let his artists ad-lib when they feel that they could be funny just winging it. There's no winging on Saturday Night Live.
There's no winging on Saturday Night Live. There is some winging on our program, depending on where the conversation goes. Couple more questions, if I may. If I remember correctly, Chevy Chase's variety show, that was one of those situations where you were given like a 5. If this is the show I'm thinking of, it was on for like 1 week as like a test market sort of thing. It's very difficult. It could take several weeks, especially today. It could take several weeks for a show to find its audience. So I mean that's another factor when you're only on 1 week, and if sometimes you may not discover that he was doing a show until Thursday or Friday. You tune in Friday, and then you come back the following Monday thinking he's going to be on, and he's not there. That's very difficult to build an audience.
True, but we were actually on longer than that.
Okay.
I think we were on for at least 4 weeks or something like that before they pulled the plug. But the point I made, I mean, it's a great example of, in the drama genre, NYPD had low ratings, lousy reviews. In fact, when I produced and directed the National Emmy Awards one year, we did a parody opening of all of the huge hit shows in America, like Gunsmoke in the early days, and that got horrible reviews, and et cetera. NYPD as a series didn't take off until they were awarded so many awards on the Emmy Awards, and then that's when I think it was NBC that got behind it and gave it a good time slot. And television is so dependent upon time slots, advertising, promotions, and so forth, that a lot of shows don't really get a fair shake. And today, with the proliferation of the fourth network, cable television, reruns everywhere, things that were never to be seen by children that were aired at 10 o'clock at night, you can now see at 8 o'clock in the morning. And the cable and the internet and so forth, that it's a whole new ballgame. And so I think in the case of getting a fair shot with the public, I don't think the Chevy Chase show is an example. When I was hired, they said, what do you think the show should be? And I said, I don't know what the show should be, but I know what it shouldn't be, and that's to just try to duplicate the other late-night shows, which is exactly what Fox made him do. So I take responsibility for either not just quitting or whatever. I stuck it out to the end, but I really felt sorry for Chevy, and I felt he got a bum rap.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back. One more item. If you're starting a company, particularly one that is in an emerging market, you know that averting any sort of legal dispute is crucial to your business plan. Our friends at Tectonic Law offer an array of services that can help you avoid and preempt future litigation while also developing and protecting your intellectual property and intangible assets. Tectonic Law serves the needs of a host of emerging industries throughout California and beyond, including industrial designers, beverage makers, artists, farmers, retail stores, health practitioners, wellness experts, cosmetics manufacturers, nonprofit organizations, innovators in sustainable practices, and libraries. Go to tectoniclaw.com to learn more about how Tectonic Law can help your business thrive. tectoniclaw.com. Rock solid representation for groundbreaking industries.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer, or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit FrontPorchRealtyGroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
Hi, this is Melissa Manchester, and you lucky people, are listening to TV Confidential.
We'll play more of our conversation with Steve Bender next week on TV Confidential. We'll ask a few more questions about his career in television, including working with Danny Kaye, Petula Clark, and Harry Belafonte. In the meantime, Fade Up 26, the movers and shakers of variety television, available Amazon.com, where books are sold online. We'll play part 2 of our conversation with Morgan White Jr. week back on TV Confidential.
Now you can fly anywhere in the world and pay discount prices on your airline tickets. Book a flight today to London, Paris, Madrid, or anywhere else you want to go. And pay a lot less guaranteed. Call the International Travel Department right now at Low Cost Airlines.
800-222-0511. 800-222-0511. Again, that's 800-222-0511.